After finishing third in the United States Grand Prix, Max Verstappen said something somewhat controversial. When asked to comment on the performance of Ferrari, or lack thereof, at Austin, he commented to our Dutch colleagues that that's what happens when you stop cheating. I'm joined by Scott Mitchell to delve into why he said that and what's actually going on. Now, Scott, why did Max say what he said?
Well, Max was referring, we believe, because he obviously hasn't said explicitly what that's a reference to. We believe it's a reference to a technical directive that was sent out by the FIA that relates to F1's fuel flow rules, or the measurement of the fuel flow limit in Formula One. Because prior to the United States Grand Prix, a clarification was made by the FIA to say that any potential way of subverting the regulations that stop people tampering with the fuel flow to get more fuel in, more power, more performance, would be illegal. Red Bull had made that clarification in the middle of a lot of intrigue around how exactly Ferrari is getting significant engine performance and has such a performance advantage in qualifying. So that was the context of the weekend, and then what we saw at Austin was Ferrari have reduced performance. Now, that is just circumstantial at the moment, but the point that Mercedes and Red Bull made was that Ferrari was slower on the speed races compared to the advantage that they had before Austin. So what Max was saying, in effect, was, well, this has happened before the weekend, this is the result now, you don't need to be a genius in Max's eyes to make the connection.
Well, of course, in the press conference, he did refer to a piece of paper, didn't he? A clear reference to the technical directive. And of course, this is something Red Bull clearly has its suspicions about, because these technical directives come out. Teams can ask the FIA about whether doing a certain thing is legal or not. And if it's legal, in the FIA's opinion, they'll write back and say, yeah, that seems to be okay to us. If it's not considered legal, they still respond, but all of that gets sent round to the teams in the form of a technical directive, a kind of addendum to the rules. So Red Bull, by what they've done, clearly suspect they may have flushed out what they think Ferrari was doing. So that's the political landscape behind this.
Yes, exactly. And there's been all sorts of theories about what Ferrari may or may not be doing. There's one theory that relates to oil in the intercooler and leaking through, and then basically burning oil in the combustion process. There's some kind of pneumatic air trick that one of the manufacturers as well thinks might be playing a part. There's potential ERS trickery as well, depending on who you speak to. So this is what I meant by this swirl of intrigue around what Ferrari's doing, and the best way that the FIA thinks is to deal with this is for basically one of the teams that has one of these theories to lodge a protest. So we protest this team on these grounds because we believe they're contravening these regulations. But none of the teams want to protest one another, which is why the seeking clarification from the FIA and getting this technical directive is a good way, because it effectively flushes out the potential rules breach and just makes sure that you can't do anything about the races that have passed, whether it's 7 races since the summer break or whatever, or all races in the season. What you can do is make the rest of the season a fair fight, and crucially as well, clarify the rules for 2020, because if they think Ferrari's done something to get an advantage and that's legal, then all the other engine manufacturers want to be able to do it. So the crucial thing is being able to identify what you think they're doing. That's step one, which is why it takes so long, because you need to try and work out what might they be doing and what would the impact be, and does that correlate with what we're seeing? But then step 2 is find out whether it's legal or not. And I believe, based on what Max has said and what was put to the FIA beforehand, I think that's what Red Bull has done in the last few days.
And of course, the fuel flow limit, 100 kilogram per hour, that's the instantaneous speed limit of the fuel, if you like. And the suggestion, or the implication, should we say, of Red Bull's questions is whether you could effectively trick the monitoring system into you're not exceeding that limit at the monitored points. And these monitored points are constant. They're fractions of a second they're sampled in, but you could boost it in between, which would obviously be a fairly serious piece of work to do and quite questionable. But we have to say, Ferrari has not been charged. Nobody's protested. Ferrari has certainly not been found guilty of anything, so we have to be very clear there. But what was very obvious in Austin was that straight line speed advantage, the GPS data was clear. If you look at Suzuka, the last race at normal altitude, shall we say, the advantage on the main straight there was something of the order of 6/10, a little bit more. In Austin on the main straight, it was maybe a third of that. So there is a difference. But of course, Ferrari has had this put to them. They've defended it, and Mattia Binotto has come up with various things that they say contributed to the lack of performance in Austin.
Well, it's been interesting to follow what Binotto and Ferrari have said in public over the last 7 to 10 days, really, since before Mexico, because it's basically gone from them saying that they find the speculation annoying, but they don't care about what the FIA does because it's the other team's problem, not theirs. Then it was, well, bring it on if you're going to protest us, because then we can clear our name and this is rubbish. And then over the Austin weekend, that changed again and became, actually, we're really annoyed by this and we want the FIA to come out and tell everyone that we're not doing anything wrong. And then after Sunday's race, I don't know whether Max's comments were explicitly put to them, but Binotto referred to stuff that he'd read and heard said after the Grand Prix had finished. And he said basically that those sort of comments are not becoming in F1. They're not good for the sport. People should be more careful about what they say. Basically saying that there's no grounds for it. Charles Leclerc referred to what Max said, specifically to what Max said as a joke. Said he doesn't know what's going on in our team, so how can he comment? And then Binotto went on to say that yes, there was a speed drop at Austin relative to the others compared to the previous Grand Prix, but he said that was down to various factors, such as Leclerc, for example, being on a high mileage, older spec engine because he had a problem with his most recent engine in final practice, and also what sounded like a bit of a setup downforce experiment, shall we say, because they've had a lower downforce, lower drag package all year. They've been trying to put more and more peak downforce on that car over the course of the season. And what Binotto claims is that what Ferrari had for Austin was a higher than usual downforce setup, which gave them more performance in the corners. He said that they weren't giving away anything really compared to Mercedes and Red Bull through the corners, unlike every other race this season. But the offset of that was that they were slightly slower in a straight line.
And this is why we need to see more races to be sure. There's certainly, should we say, some circumstantial evidence, but circumstantial evidence isn't enough. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, as it's said. But I asked Toto Wolff after the race whether they thought that's what they're doing, and he said, well, it's not clear, we don't really know. But I then asked him, well, hypothetically, if a team was doing something that was raised in the Red Bull technical directive, would that go beyond a grey area? And he said, yes, if a team were to do that, it would be foul play. So it's clearly a point of massive intrigue and some annoyance, both for Ferrari and the rival teams who suspect them.
It has caused a lot of irritation in the Ferrari camp, but I suspect that Mercedes and Red Bull and co will actually be quite pleased with how this has played out, because yes, they've clearly got under Ferrari's skin. That will help them in a way, but they haven't had to go through the mechanisms of a protest to do it, and that can open a massive can of worms and create a horrible dynamic between the teams, because while they are competitors, there does need to be an element of trust and cooperation. This has avoided it. So if this is what Ferrari has been doing, then the bottom line is to the letter of the law and to the teams involved, they will almost certainly let it go in terms of what's happened over the first part of the year, because it should in theory be resolved now. No one would continue to do this if they were doing it before, because it is such a clear rules breach, and the FIA has said as such. So I think there's a strong chance that all of this intrigue, a line will be drawn under it now. Whether or not Ferrari feels aggrieved enough to take it further or take retaliatory action in the future remains to be seen. But it's possible, and this is what Red Bull and Mercedes will hope, that maybe this has set the tone for a fair and clear fight in the future, which is ultimately the whole reason for them going about their business the way they did in the first place.